So usually when we talk about a miracle, there's this really rigid expectation of rule breaking.
Right, like a literal glitch in the Matrix scenario.
Exactly. You
Yeah.
look up, the sky opens, the sea splits in half, and physics basically just takes a coffee break.
Yeah, and someone points at it and goes, there it is, magic, proof.
Right.
Yeah.
Because we tend to define the miraculous strictly by its contrast to the mundane. Like
Hmm.
the natural world is, boring, predictable, mechanical, and the miracle is the violent disruption of those mechanics.
Well, the human mind gravitates toward the undeniable. A localized suspension of the laws of nature provides this comfortingly binary view of reality.
Yeah, it's very black and white.
Completely. The infinite makes itself visible by shattering the finite. It leaves absolutely no room for ambiguity or skepticism. It's a fireworks display of divine intervention.
But then you step into the world of mystical theology, specifically the Hasidic philosophy we're unpacking for you on the deep dive today, and that clean, comforting division is just entirely upended.
Oh, it flips the script entirely.
Yeah, we're diving into a text, a memoir, a mystical discourse from the spring of 1952 that forces you to redefine what a miracle even is. It makes you look at the exact same world you've always lived in, but through a lens where the ordinary rules of physics, biology, and just the sheer consistency of the universe become the most astonishing things in the room.
Right, whether you're deeply spiritual or wildly curious about mystical philosophy, or you just want to understand how the ordinary might actually be extraordinary, you are exactly in the right place.
So to understand that, we really have to tackle the core mystery that anchors this whole philosophical architecture.
And that foundation is a single, deeply enigmatic verse from the book of Micah.
Right.
Specifically, it's Micah chapter 7, verse 15. So the prophet is delivering a vision of the ultimate idealized future, the final redemption of the world. And the verse reads, "As in the days of your exodus from Egypt, I will show him wonders."
Which, on the surface, it just sounds like a nice poetic promise.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, a classic callback to a major historical event.
But in the realm of textual analysis, especially in this 1952 discourse, poetry is treated like physics. Every single word is precise.
Exactly. And reading this verse, a massive paradox immediately jumps out.
Right. One that the classical sages, figures like Ben Zoma, wrestled with heavily.
Because the foundational tradition insists that the future ultimate redemption, the final end state of the universe, is supposed to be infinitely, unimaginably greater than the historical exodus from Egypt.
Right, because the Exodus was a localized temporary escape for one specific group of people.
Exactly. And the future redemption is described as universal, permanent, and literally a complete transformation of reality itself.
So the paradox centers on the benchmark that Micah uses.
Right, if you're promising someone a state-of-the-art interstellar spacecraft, you don't pitch it by saying, hey, this is going to be just as amazing as that tricycle you rode when you were 3.
Yeah, that's a terrible pitch.
Right. Comparing the ultimate permanent elevation of the cosmos to a localized historical event in Egypt just seems like a massive downgrade.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because looking closer at the Hebrew grammar in the text, it gets even more jarring.
It really does.
The discourse promises to solve this theological puzzle, but first, it points out 3 very specific, really strange linguistic choices in this short sentence.
So the first anomaly is pluralization.
Right.
Micah says, as in the days of your exodus. But the historical exit from Egypt, the actual leaving, happened in a single night.
Yeah, it was an event, a singular departure point.
Exactly. So pluralizing it to days implies an ongoing era or some kind of multi-step process, which really doesn't fit the historical narrative of grabbing your unleavened bread and just running.
And then the second linguistic anomaly is all about the sensory framing of the promise. The text doesn't say, I will do wonders, or, wonders will occur. It specifically says, I will show wonders.
Right. The verb really emphasizes visual perception.
Exactly. It implies that the core of the miracle isn't necessarily the creation of a new phenomenon, but the revelation of something to an observer.
Yeah, the wonder is inextricably linked to the actual act of seeing it.
Which makes me wonder if the text is hinting that the miracles are, already happening, completely unnoticed, and the future upgrade is really just giving us the eyesight to perceive them.
That's a huge part of it, yes.
And then we hit the third mystery, which is just this grammatical whiplash mid-sentence.
Oh, the pronoun shift.
Right. The verse starts in the second person, as in the days of your exodus, speaking directly to the people, but it concludes in the third person. I will show him wonders.
Not show you, but show him.
Right. The text abruptly introduces this unidentified third party right at the climax of the prophecy.
And these three anomalies, the plural days, the emphasis on showing, and the sudden shift to him, these are the pressure points the 1952 discourse uses to dismantle our entire framework of reality.
Wow.
Because the text recognizes that you cannot answer a question about the ultimate future of the universe without first radically redefining how we categorize events in the present.
Right, you have to establish a taxonomy of the impossible.
Exactly. So it categorizes miracles into two distinct buckets.
And the first bucket aligns with our standard blockbuster definition. The text calls these miracles above nature.
Right. This is the Exodus itself, the Nile turning to blood, the Red Sea splitting into dry land so millions can cross.
The laws of physics are not just bent. They are suspended, broken, or utterly bypassed. Like the glitch in the Matrix is visible to everyone.
But then the second bucket introduces a really profound philosophical nuance. The text categorizes these as miracles clothed in the ways of nature.
Clothed in nature.
Right. These are events orchestrated by the divine, yet they wear the airtight disguise of natural causality.
So like the discourse points to historical examples like the story of Purim or the military victories of Chinooka, right?
Exactly. Political tides turn, unlikely alliances form, battles are won against staggering odds.
So a secular historian could write a massive volume documenting these events using only sociology, military strategy, and political science, and completely ignore any supernatural element.
Yes, because nature isn't shattered, it's utilized.
I picture this taxonomy like two entirely different approaches to manipulating a complex computer system.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
Right. So the bucket one miracle, the event above nature is like a brute force hacker completely crashing the server. They tear down the firewall, the user interface goes black, and strings of green code start raining down the screen.
Very dramatic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The hacker wants the user to know, absolutely and terrifyingly, I have total control over your machine, and I just destroyed your operating system to prove it.
The software is broken.
Right. But the bucket two miracle, the one clothed in nature, is like a master programmer who sneaks into the code and subtly tweaks the algorithms from the inside. Software keeps running perfectly. The user interface looks completely normal. The user's just clicking around, totally unaware they've been compromised, while the program quietly executes the exact, highly specific outcome the programmer desires without a single crash or error message.
That's perfect. And what's fascinating here is the text actually subdivides that second bucket, the programmer tweaking the code even further, creating a spectrum of concealment.
Oh, interesting.
Right. So on one end of this subspectrum, the clothing of nature is incredibly thin. The disguise is almost transparent.
Give me an example of that.
Consider a military victory where a tiny, untrained militia defeats a massive, technologically advanced empire. Technically, it was fought with swords and strategy, obeying physical laws, but the statistical improbability is so astronomical that any reasonable observer recognizes the miraculous underlying the natural facade.
Right. It's the kind of event where even the cynics shrug and say, okay, well, the math on that is basically impossible.
Yeah.
The disguise is essentially a pair of Groucho Marx glasses. You can see right through it.
Exactly. But then the text takes us to the deepest, most extreme end of bucket two. Miracles so profoundly hidden, so flawlessly and seamlessly woven into the mundane fabric of cause and effect that it cites a classical rabbinic axiom. It says, even the one experiencing the miracle doesn't recognize it.
Wow. I just need to stop and process that. A miracle occurring in your life, saving you, altering your trajectory, and you have zero awareness of it.
None at all.
Like you sleep through your alarm, you miss your usual train, you grumble about being late, you have absolutely no idea the train you missed actually derailed.
Right. You just think you had a bad morning.
You're walking through a parted sea, but you perceive it as just a light breeze.
And the discourse links this deeply concealed reality to a specific verse in Psalms. To him who alone does great wonders.
Okay.
The mystical interpretation strips away the standard reading. It doesn't mean God is the only being capable of doing wonders. It means God is the only one who even knows the wonder is happening.
That's wild.
Right. The beneficiary, the observer, the entire universe is completely oblivious. The intervention is known alone to the creator.
But wait, the text makes a massive theological leap here that I have to challenge.
Sure, go ahead.
It argues that these hidden, unacknowledged miracles, the ones nobody notices, actually emanate from a much higher divine source than the blockbuster Red Sea splitting miracles.
Don't argue that.
Logically, that just feels backward to me. If we're talking about unlimited, infinite divine power, shouldn't the physics-breaking, system-crashing flex be the ultimate display of that power?
It seems that way, yeah.
Like if you possess limitless energy, blowing up a mountain to change a river's course seems like a far more profound manifestation of your power than subtly orchestrating a rainstorm to do the same thing.
The discourse actually anticipates that exact human instinct. We constantly conflate volume with power.
Right.
To explain why the hidden miracle is structurally superior, the text delves into the theological physics of the infinite divine light, what Hasidic philosophy terms the Or Ein Sof.
Okay.
This is the absolute, limitless, unbounded energy of the Creator, devoid of any definition, boundary, or restriction.
The raw, unfiltered source code of existence.
Exactly. So when a bucket one miracle occurs, a miracle above nature, like the sea splitting it happens because a concentrated flash of that raw, infinite light is injected into the finite physical world.
Okay, I follow.
But the finite world is structurally incapable of housing the infinite. They are mutually exclusive states. A teacup cannot hold the ocean.
Right.
So what happens when the infinite forces its way in? The finite simply collapses. Nature is nullified. The laws of fluid dynamics break down at the Red Sea because they are overwhelmed by an energy completely outside their dimensional capacity.
Oh, I see. It's like trying to plug a 1,000,000-volt industrial power line directly into a standard 120-volt wall outlet in your living room.
Yes.
The outlet doesn't adapt to the new power surge, just violently explodes.
Right.
So the miracle we see, the breaking of nature, is actually just the explosion of the finite trying to absorb the infinite.
Precisely. The miracle requires the natural order to step aside or be temporarily destroyed to make room for the divine presence. But the text asks us to analyze what that necessity implies about the power at work. If nature has to be broken for the miracle to occur, it implies a turf war.
Right.
It implies that the infinite and the finite cannot coexist in the same space. It's an adversarial relationship. For the infinite to be present, the finite must be eradicated.
I see the limitation there. A turf war implies boundaries. It implies the infinite is somehow, like, allergic to the finite.
And if the infinite is truly infinite, it shouldn't have allergies.
Right.
It shouldn't be restricted by the boundaries of nature. But crucially, it also shouldn't be restricted by the sheer magnitude of its own infinity.
Oh, that's deep.
Right. The text argues that miracles within nature bucket 2 demand a staggeringly higher, more paradoxical manifestation of power.
Okay.
It requires the ability of the infinite to operate perfectly, absolutely, and totally within the microscopic, restrictive boundaries of the finite physical world without causing the finite to explode.
Wow. Okay, so using that electrical analogy, the bucket 2 miracle is taking that exact same 1,000,000-volt industrial power line, plugging it into the standard wall outlet, and instead of exploding, the outlet quietly, perfectly powers a toaster.
Yes.
The toaster doesn't melt. The bread browns evenly. The fact that the fragile, limited outlet actually survives the passage of infinite energy and translates it into mundane operation that is the actual flex.
Exactly. The highest expression of limitlessness is the masterful habitation of limits.
That's a great way to put it.
In an overt nature-breaking miracle, the divine demonstrates mastery over nature, brushing it aside like an obstacle. But in a hidden miracle, the divine demonstrates that it is the absolute master of nature, animating and orchestrating it from the inside out so flawlessly that the puppet strings are just invisible.
Think about this in your own life, you know? We are so conditioned to search for break-the-rules miracles as validation.
We really are.
We want the sudden, inexplicable windfall, the miraculous, spontaneous remission, the burning bush that doesn't consume itself. We gauge the presence of the spiritual by how much our normal, boring reality gets shattered.
Yeah, if it doesn't break physics, it doesn't count.
Right. But this 1952 Maamar is arguing that the subtle, invisible, intensely mundane orchestration of your everyday life, the boring traffic jam, the chance meeting, the frustratingly slow natural causality, is actually pulsing with an unimaginably higher, deeper divine frequency than the fireworks display.
It demands a total cognitive reframing of observation and gratitude.
It really does.
The mundane is no longer an empty secular waiting room between spiritual experiences. The mundane is the most sophisticated, high-level camouflage for the infinite. It is the ultimate containment field.
Which perfectly paves the way for the text's next major argument, right?
Yeah.
That nature itself, just the plain old predictable turning of the gears of the universe, is the greatest magic trick of all.
Yes. The discourse reinforces this by pulling from a classic 15th century Jewish philosophical work called the Akeda, authored by Rabbi Yitzhak Rama.
Okay.
The Akeda introduces a perspective that borders on the scientific. It posits that humanity can comprehend the absolute infinite greatness of the Creator, not by searching the margins for anomalies and system crashes, but by deeply analyzing the ongoing, uninterrupted laws of nature themselves.
But what is the specific mechanism the Ikeda points to as proof? Because when most people look at nature, they don't see an infinite divine presence.
No, they don't.
They see blind, unthinking mechanics. They see gravity, thermodynamics, and biological imperatives just playing out like a clockwork machine.
Well, the proof highlighted in the text is the phenomenon of unyielding consistency.
Consistency.
Yes. It draws attention to the fact that for nearly 6,000 years, utilizing the traditional biblical timeline of the world, the immense architecture of the cosmos, the precise orbital velocities of the planets, the cyclical engine of the seasons, the biological reproduction of species, they have all continued without a single microsecond of fatigue.
Wow.
The text explicitly states that the forces of nature are as strong as the day they were created.
Right. There is no cosmic degradation. The universe doesn't require a software patch. Gravity doesn't need to be recharged. The sun doesn't burn slightly dimmer on Tuesdays because it's tired.
Exactly. And the discourse dives into the mystical mechanics required to sustain this.
How does it explain it?
It says every physical entity in creation possesses a specific highly regulated life force that dictates its attributes.
Okay.
A tree has a specific limited biological capacity. A mountain has a specific finite mass. The earth has a defined gravitational pull. Because these are created physical things, the energy animating their specific characteristics is strictly limited.
Right. A rock's life force defines it as a rock. It has boundaries. It can't spontaneously decide to photosynthesize like a leaf. Its nature is completely walled in by its finitude.
Precisely. Now, the critical pivot in the argument lies in separating the characteristics of the object from its continuous existence.
Oh, interesting.
The rock is finite. But the consistency of that rock, the fact that it maintains its structural integrity and existence across millennia, the fact that the planetary orbits maintain their momentum in an endless loop, that consistency cannot logically originate from a limited source.
Because a limited battery, no matter how large, eventually drains.
Exactly. A limited momentum, even in a vacuum, is subject to the philosophical entropy of a finite system. The fact that the fundamental systems of the universe simply do not stop implies that beneath the limited finite characteristics of nature, the engine supplying the existential fuel must be an infinite, unlimited source.
Okay, let me make sure I'm fully mapping this out.
Go for it.
The what of nature, the specific attributes of a star, a drop of water, a human cell, is finite and measurable.
Yes.
But the isness of nature, the actual phenomenon of it continually existing, regenerating its reality second after second without winking out into the void that requires an infinite engine.
You nailed it. And the text frames this as a fundamental paradox of human perception.
How so?
Well, when a person witnesses a sudden localized anomaly like water spontaneously turning to blood, they instantly, reflexively recognize the presence of an infinite power.
Right. It requires zero intellectual exertion. The shock just bypasses the analytical mind completely.
Exactly. But to perceive the infinite in the relentless consistency of nature, a person must engage in deep, sustained, rigorous contemplation.
You have to do the work.
You really do. You have to actively force your mind to recognize that the sun rising this morning isn't just a physical given, but an event that requires a constant, endless supply of infinite existential energy to actually manifest.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. The text is building a very clear hierarchy of revelation here.
It is.
Sudden, overt miracles reveal the infinite, but they do so as foreign invaders. They don't belong to our world. They have to break our world to be seen. Nature, conversely, reveals the infinite through its endless, unbreakable loop, constantly bridging the finite physical world to an infinite power source without destroying the container. So nature is the superior vessel.
It contains the infinite without shattering.
But this creates a massive logical problem regarding the original verse in Micah.
Ah, right. Let's go back to that.
If nature is the superior vessel, if ordinary, boring consistency is the absolute highest manifestation of divine power, why do we need the wonders promised in the future?
That's the million-dollar question.
As in the days of your Exodus, I will show him wonders. If the ultimate goal is just to deeply appreciate the mechanics of a Tuesday morning commute and the law of gravity, Why is a prophet promising a massive future upgrade?
Right, why not just say, in the future, you will all become really good philosophers and finally appreciate the hidden infinite in the mundane? Well, that paradox is the exact gateway to the text's vision of the ultimate future synthesis.
Okay, lay it on me.
According to this discourse, the grand goal of history isn't to regress to bucket 1 and destroy nature with overwhelming, visible miracles.
Right.
But the goal is also not to leave the miracles forever buried and hidden inside bucket 2, requiring humans to exhaust themselves philosophically just to catch a glimpse of the divine.
So what's the middle ground?
The prophesied end state of reality is for nature itself to undergo a fundamental transformation and become a transparent vessel for the infinite.
Transparent. What does a transparent universe actually look like to human consciousness?
It actually resolves the second linguistic anomaly of the Micah-verse, I will show wonders.
Oh.
The text explains that in this ultimate future, the profound infinite miracles that are currently driving the mechanics of nature in total secrecy will become visible to the naked eye.
Wow.
They will be as obvious and effortless to perceive as the splitting of the sea was to the Israelites.
So you won't need to sit on a mountaintop and meditate for 10 years just to see the infinite energy sustaining a blade of grass. You will just look at the grass, and its infinite source will be intuitively, visually obvious.
Exactly. The limits of the physical world will no longer act as an opaque shell concealing the limitless energy inside them. They will act as a lens broadcasting it.
That's beautiful.
The ultimate, unlimited power of the Creator will be revealed entirely through the intact physical world, not by bypassing or breaking it. The hardware remains perfectly intact, but the underlying source code becomes fully visible on the monitor.
I will show wonders.
Yeah.
The wonders are already here. They're literally powering the entire system right this second. But right now, the casing of the universe is made of, like, dark, opaque plastic. In the future, the casing turns to clear glass. We see the infinite gears turning.
That's a perfect way to visualize it.
And that completely explains why the future redemption is infinitely greater than the Exodus. The Exodus had to break the physical world to show us God. The future redemption elevates the physical world so that it becomes the display screen for God.
It is a staggering ontological shift. The entire physical universe transitions from being a barrier obscuring spirituality into the primary medium transmitting it.
Wow.
But to explain how humanity actually reaches this state, the text doesn't linger in the realm of cosmic astrophysics. It zooms all the way in.
How far in?
It moves from the orbits of planets directly into the messy, uncomfortable reality of human psychology.
Because if the physical world is going to become a transparent vessel, the most crucial, complex piece of that physical world is the human being.
Exactly. The text pivots to focus entirely on how a person achieves alignment with this transparent reality. It introduces the psychological concept of bittul, which translates roughly to self-nullification or the surrender of the ego to something greater.
Okay, so how does it define that surrender?
The discourse dissects bittul into two highly distinct psychological profiles, two completely different methods of surrender.
Right.
The first type is termed yuchuda ilah, which translates to higher unity. This is an entirely intellectual, cognitive, and experiential realization.
You mean example?
Imagine a person deeply engaged in mystical meditation. They contemplate the infinite vastness of the divine, and they reach a state of ecstatic enlightenment where they genuinely, deeply feel that everything before him is as nothing.
Right.
In this state, their physical surroundings, their own ego, their personal desires, it all melts away, rendered completely insignificant in the blinding light of this spiritual revelation.
This is the classic archetype of spiritual success, right?
Yeah.
The enlightened monk achieving nirvana. They see through the illusion of the material world. The ego dissolves into pure, transcendent bliss.
Exactly. Now, the second type of surrender is called Kabbalat ol, translating to acceptance of the yoke.
Acceptance of the yoke.
Yes. And this profile is radically different. This person is not experiencing a state of enlightenment. They aren't floating on a cloud of soaring intellectual revelations.
Okay.
Instead, they operate like a servant who obeys the commands of a master, even when and especially when those commands run completely counter to their own internal desires, logic, and natural physical inclinations.
Oh, so this person isn't meditating on a mountaintop. This is the exhausted, frustrated person in the middle of a chaotic Tuesday who really wants to snap at their coworker or really wants to keep that extra money instead of giving it to charity, but they drag their feet, grit their teeth, and force themselves to do the right thing simply because they recognize an ultimate authority outside themselves.
Yes, it's a friction-heavy, grinding obedience.
It's the daily grind.
Now, the brilliance of the text is how it maps these two psychological profiles directly onto the taxonomy of miracles we discussed earlier.
Oh, wow. Okay. Let's map it.
The discourse explicitly states that Yuchuda Illa, the ecstatic intellectual nullification of the ego, functions exactly like a bucket one miracle.
The miracle above nature.
Exactly. It is a physics-breaking miracle occurring inside the human mind. The person's physical reality and ego are overwhelmed and temporarily eradicated by a flash of infinite intellectual light.
They're splitting their own internal Red Sea. The finite mind collapses to let the infinite realization in.
Beautifully put. And Kabbalat all, the gritty, friction-filled, action-based obedience, is the exact psychological equivalent of a bucket two miracle. A miracle clothed tightly in nature.
Okay.
The person's natural ego, their base desires, their physical heaviness, all of that nature remains entirely intact. They haven't destroyed or transcended their stubborn personality.
Right, they're still grumpy.
Exactly. But they force their physical actions to align perfectly with a higher divine will. The infinite is operating flawlessly within the microscopic restrictive boundaries of their stubborn human nature without destroying that nature.
It seems so counterintuitive, though. Like, let's pause and really look at the implications of this, because it completely inverts the standard human value system regarding spirituality.
It really does.
If you ask anyone to rank these two people, 99% of us would say the enlightened monk experiencing total ego death and universal oneness. Type 1 is operating on a massively higher spiritual plane than the grumpy guy forcing himself to write a charity check while complaining about his taxes. Type 2.
Oh, definitely.
We idolize the feeling of enlightenment. We treat the struggle as a sign of spiritual immaturity. But the text argues the exact opposite. It elevates the gritty, unfeeling struggle above the ecstatic revelation.
Yes, and it demands that we ask a very uncomfortable question about the nature of enlightenment.
What's the question?
When the enlightened person surrenders their ego, what exactly is doing the surrendering? It is their intellect. It is their capacity for profound feeling. It is their mind recognizing a superior truth. But because that surrender is entirely predicated on their understanding and their ecstatic experience, it remains tethered to the self. Their nullification is highly conditional.
I see.
It is conditional on their ability to perceive the light. If the light fades or their understanding falters, the surrender vanishes.
Wow, so it's basically just a spiritually dressed up version of self-interest.
Yeah.
They surrender because it feels profoundly good and intellectually satisfying to experience the divine.
Exactly. The person practicing Kabbalat all, however, is operating on an entirely different grid.
Right.
They are acting in direct opposition to their own nature and understanding, purely because it is the ultimate will of the Creator. This bypasses the ego apparatus entirely. Their obedience isn't contingent on their perception, their intellect, or their emotional state. It is a raw, unadulterated alignment with the infinite. The text views this as a truer, more absolute form of nullification because it doesn't require the person to feel enlightened or smart to execute it.
They are the standard wall outlet, perfectly channeling the million volts without exploding. And the craziest part is they have absolutely no idea how electricity works.
Right.
They just quietly power the toaster.
Perfect. And the discourse then scales this psychological framework up to analyze the grand sweep of historical eras.
Okay, let's zoom out.
It contrasts the era of the Holy Temple in Jerusalem with the era of exile. Specifically, the era we occupy right now, which mystical traditions refer to as the footsteps of the Messiah, the darkest, most confusing period immediately preceding the dawn.
So if we look at the psychology of the people living during the Temple era, how does the text categorize their spiritual experience?
During the Temple era, humanity existed in a paradigm of overt revelation. The text notes that people literally saw divinity.
Wow.
There were 10 continuous visible miracles occurring daily in the temple. The presence of the infinite was tangible. Consequently, their standard mode of surrender, their bittul, was heavily weighted toward type 1, Yechuda Ilah. It was intellectual and experiential. It is relatively easy to surrender your ego and feel spiritually connected when you can physically see infinite light radiating in your city.
Right, it doesn't take a leap of faith to believe in gravity when an anvil drops on your foot. Your surrender is just a logical reaction to the obvious environment.
Exactly. But in the era of exile, The paradigm we navigate daily divinity is subjected to maximum concealment. There is no central temple radiating miracles. The world appears entirely chaotic, deeply secular, and driven solely by the blind mechanical forces of nature.
Yeah.
In this environment, choosing morality, maintaining faith, and performing spiritual actions does not yield an ecstatic emotional high. It requires a stubborn, deeply unglamorous mechanism of self-sacrifice. The text uses the Hebrew term mesiras nefesh.
Handing over the soul. It's the ultimate manifestation of kabbalatol, acceptance of the yoke in complete darkness.
Yes, and this leads to one of the most stunning, counterintuitive claims in the entire discourse.
What's that?
The text invokes the figure of Moses.
Okay.
Now, Moses is universally understood as the pinnacle of human spiritual achievement, the ultimate prophet who attained the absolute highest degree of type 1 intellectual revelation.
Right. He spoke with the divine face to face. He orchestrated the splitting of the sea. He existed in a state of nearly constant, overwhelming spiritual light.
He is the absolute archetype of the enlightened mind.
Right.
Yet, the discourse cites a tradition from earlier Hasidic masters detailing a moment when Moses peered through the corridor of time and witnessed the Jewish people in the final generation of exile, our generation.
What did he see?
He saw people living in a state of total spiritual numbness, surrounded by secular darkness, feeling absolutely no connection to the divine, and yet stubbornly putting on tefillin, stubbornly giving charity, stubbornly forcing themselves to keep the faith, despite the overwhelming friction of their lives.
Wow.
And the text says that witnessing this, Moses was profoundly humbled.
Okay, let's dissect the mechanics of that humbling. Why does Moses, a man who literally glowed with divine radiation, feel inferior to an exhausted accountant struggling to focus on a prayer?
Because Moses recognized the source code of their actions. He knew that his own staggering obedience and enlightenment were fueled by infinite revelation.
Right, his connection was reactive. The divine revealed light, and Moses reacted with awe.
Exactly. But the modern person's obedience is not a reaction to light. It is generated from scratch in the dark, fueled by nothing but raw, stubborn, essential loyalty. In the mystical physics of this text, that blind, grinding loyalty reaches past the revealed light of the divine and touches the absolute unknowable essence of the Creator.
That's incredible.
Moses' nullification of existence, the ego melting in the light, fell away in reverence to the modern person's acceptance of the yoke, the ego being dragged forward in the dark.
So what does this all mean? We find ourselves in a philosophical universe where hidden, mundane miracles are structurally superior to obvious, system-crashing ones.
Yes.
And a historical reality where blind, gritty, unfeeling struggle taps into a deeper, infinite power than the most blissful state of enlightenment. The text is systematically taking every metric we use to measure spirituality and just completely inverting it.
It is a total reversal of the standard hierarchy of existence. And this brings us to the most symbolic, radical, and visceral portion of the entire memoir.
Okay, where are we going next?
The text pivots to a prophetic vision regarding the mechanics of the future redemption, specifically a bizarre prophecy about the splitting of the river and the necessity of treading through it wearing shoes.
A river and shoes. This sounds like a sudden detour into metaphorical infrastructure.
Yeah.
How does this connect to everything we've just discussed about psychology and miracles?
To decode the metaphor of the shoes, the text introduces a concept regarding the relationship between the physical body and the spiritual soul that is truly mind-bending.
Okay.
In our current present-day reality, how do we classically define the dynamic between the body and the soul?
Well, the standard dualistic view is that the body is a dense, problematic piece of hardware. It's a biological machine driven by base instincts, hunger, fatigue, comfort, survival. The soul is the pure, elevated divine spark trapped inside the machine. So the soul's job is to constantly fight the body, discipline it, elevate it, and provide all the spiritual nourishment for the human being. The body is sustained entirely by the life force trickling down from the soul.
That accurately describes the mechanics of the present era. But the discourse reveals a shocking reversal.
Oh boy.
It states that in the ultimate future, when the universe reaches its final state, this dynamic will invert. In the future, the soul will receive its spiritual nourishment from the physical body.
Wait, what? The soul getting its spiritual energy from a physical biological body?
Yeah.
That sounds like a complete paradox. How does a piece of meat generate spiritual energy?
It traces directly back to the mechanics of Kabbalatol, the gritty, action-based surrender we just analyzed.
Okay, keep going.
The soul is inherently spiritual. Its connection to the divine is natural, beautiful, and akin to the type 1 intellectual enlightenment. But it is limited by its own spiritual nature. It isn't crossing any boundaries.
Right.
The physical body, however, is incredibly dense, profoundly stubborn, and biologically wired to oppose the divine will.
Yeah, the body just wants a nap and a sandwich.
Exactly. So when a human being utilizes their physical body to perform a spiritual action, when they force their stubborn neurology and musculature to obey an ultimate command despite the friction they are executing, a bucket to miracle.
A miracle clothed in nature.
Yes. They are drawing down the absolute highest, most paradoxical, infinite energy into the physical realm.
So the body, precisely because of the immense friction and resistance it naturally possesses, acts as a high-resistance filament. By pushing divine action through that dense resistance, it generates a frequency of spiritual energy far more intense and absolute than the soul's natural frictionless meditation.
Exactly. The body's struggle bypasses the conditional realm of intellect and taps directly into the absolute essence of the divine will. Right now, in the era of exile, that massive energy is being generated by every stubborn good deed, but it remains entirely hidden. The body is acting as a battery, storing this infinite charge.
Okay.
In the ultimate future, when nature becomes transparent glass, that stored energy will be fully revealed. The soul will look at the physical body and realize, you have been tapping into an infinite power source at the very core of reality that I, with all my spiritual purity, could never reach.
That's amazing.
The physical body will literally become the source radiating spiritual nourishment to the soul.
That is a staggering reevaluation of physical existence.
Yeah.
And this brings us directly to the metaphor of the shoes.
It does. The text utilizes the creation of leather shoes as the ultimate physical metaphor for this grueling psychological process.
Okay.
Consider the raw material of leather. It begins as the hide of an animal. It is coarse, it is thick, it is biologically dead, and if left to its own devices, it is entirely rigid, inflexible, and unwearable.
It perfectly represents the physical body and the base animalistic nature of the human ego.
Yes.
Stubborn, hard, and resistant to change.
Exactly. Now, to transform that rigid hide into a usable shoe, the craftsman does not destroy the leather. They do not throw it in a fire to burn it away.
Right.
Instead, they subject it to a grueling, intensive, and often foul-smelling process. They beat the hide, they soak it in harsh chemicals, they stretch it, scrape it, and tan it.
Violent.
Very. The tanning process is a violent negotiation with the material, forcing the dead, rigid hide to become soft, pliable, and perfectly contoured to the anatomy of a human foot. The goal is to turn the obstacle into a protective garment that allows a person to traverse jagged, dangerous terrain without injury.
The linguistic connection the text makes here is brilliant.
It is.
It points out that the Hebrew word for spiritual work or service, avoda, shares the exact same root letters as the Hebrew word for the physical process of tanning leather, abud. This is not a coincidence. It's a deep structural pun. Spiritual work is not about retreating to a mountaintop, meditating, and ignoring your inner animal. Spiritual work is avoda. It's a bud.
Exactly.
It's the gritty process of taking the hard, stubborn, coarse elements of your own psychology, your deep-seated resentments, your addiction to validation, your explosive anger, your paralyzing laziness, and subjecting them to the hard, repetitive, uncomfortable work of behavioral modification. You beat and soften those traits through disciplined action until they align with a higher purpose. You don't destroy your aggressive nature, you tan it until it becomes a fierce drive for justice. We aren't destroying the animal hide, we are making it structurally useful.
That encapsulates the defining ethos of Hasidic philosophy. The objective is never to transcend the physical realm, the objective is to entirely transform it.
Wow.
And to solidify this concept, the discourse provides a mathematical proof utilizing gematria, the ancient system where Hebrew letters carry specific numerical values, revealing hidden structural connections between words.
Okay, let's do the math.
The text highlights the divine name Elohim. This specific name represents the divine attribute of strict justice, limitation, and the concealment of the infinite within the physical boundaries of the world.
Okay.
The numerical value of Elohim is 86.
I'm following the math. Elohim equals 86.
And the numerical value of the Hebrew word for nature, hateva, is exactly 86.
So structurally, mathematically, the text is saying Elohim is nature. The natural world isn't devoid of God. It is the specific manifestation of the divine name of limitation.
Precisely. Therefore, when an individual engages in the grueling ibud, the tanning of the leather of their own animalistic soul, when they force their physical nature to align with the divine will through the stubborn friction of Kabbalat ol, they are not merely engaging in localized psychological self-improvement, they are participating in a cosmic mechanism.
Oh, wow.
By refining their own tiny sliver of nature, they are actively refining and elevating the entire overarching concept of hateva, of nature itself. They are performing the exact labor required to eventually allow the entire physical universe to become transparent.
And this hard-won, softened leather, this refined physical action, becomes the literal shoe we must wear in the future.
Yes.
The prophecy in the text states that in the future redemption, the divine will split the river and humanity will tread through it wearing shoes.
Right.
The rushing river is a metaphor for the overwhelming, unfiltered, infinite flow of divine revelation that will flood the world. If a person attempts to step into a rushing river of infinite light, barefoot meaning, relying only on their soul, without the refined physical actions to anchor them, they will be completely swept away. Their finite ego will dissolve. They will drown in the light.
But if they are wearing the shoes?
If they're wearing the shoes, the protective garments forged from the grueling, dark work of softening their physical nature during the era of exile, those shoes act as a grounding mechanism.
Exactly.
They allow the person to walk safely and confidently through the infinite revelation without losing their distinct identity. Their physical body, through its history of stubborn obedience, has become structurally strong enough to contain the infinite without exploding.
It is a flawless synthesis of the entire discourse. The agonizing friction of the present era is not an obstacle to the future. It is the exact material required to build the vessel that can survive the future.
I feel like we have disassembled the universe and put it back together.
That's a lot to take in.
Let's bring this massive exploration full circle back to the very beginning. We started with the 3 grammatical anomalies in that single verse from Micah. As in the days of your exodus from Egypt, I will show him wonders.
Right.
We had the plural days, the visual emphasis of show, and the sudden third-person shift to him. How does this 1952 memoir finally resolve these threads?
It resolves them by weaving every concept we've discussed into a master architecture of historical time, often referred to as a pipeline.
Okay, let's start with the first one.
First, the anomaly of the plural days. The text reveals that the historical exodus from Egypt was not merely a localized event that concluded when they crossed the border. It was a cosmic initiation sequence. It forcefully opened the foundational spiritual pipeline, the Dinor in Hebrew, for all future miraculous redemptions. The historical exodus was a 7-day process, reaching its climax on the 7th day with the splitting of the sea.
The ultimate bucket one miracle, breaking nature to let the light in.
Exactly. But the text argues that when the sea was split on that 7th day, it wasn't just a logistical solution to escape an army. It was the planting of a deeply concealed spiritual seed in the fabric of reality.
Wow.
That ancient event contained within it the latent blueprint for the future splitting of the river we just analyzed.
This completely solves the bicycle versus spaceship paradox.
It does.
Egypt wasn't a downgrade benchmark. Egypt was the moment the miraculous software was first installed onto the world's hard drive.
That's a great way to think about it.
The future redemption is simply the moment that software is finally fully executed and made visible. The plural days spans the entirety of history, linking the initial installation in Egypt to the final execution in the future.
A perfect summation. And this seamlessly explains the second mystery. I will show wonders.
Right. Why the emphasis on sight?
Because, as we have established, the staggering wonders of the ultimate future are not going to be new creations or novel disruptions of physics.
Right.
They are the deeply hidden bucket 2 miracles, the infinite energy constantly sustaining the consistency of a rock, the massive spiritual power secretly generated by the stubborn physical struggles of exhausted people in the dark. These wonders have been fully operational the entire time. The ultimate miracle of the future is simply that the divine will show them to us. The opaque plastic of the universe will become clear glass. Humanity will look back at their grueling, seemingly mundane lives and realize the entire landscape was ablaze with infinite light the whole time.
The wonder isn't the event. The wonder is the subtle revelation of what was already humming beneath the floorboards. That is chillingly beautiful.
Oh, it really is.
But we are still left with the final, jarring grammatical shift. Why does the verse suddenly switch to the third person? I will show him wonders. Who is him?
To crack this final code, the discourse relies on the foundational text of Jewish mysticism, the Zohar. The Zohar states unequivocally that the word him in this verse refers specifically to Moses.
We return to Moses.
We do. Consider his role. Moses was the physical orchestrator of the historical Exodus. He was the human conduit who forcibly opened that cosmic pipeline of redemption. He raised his staff and split the sea.
Right.
However, because he existed at the beginning of the timeline, the ultimate matured fruits of that pipeline, the transparent nature, the physical body nourishing the soul, the full, blinding revelation of the hidden miracles, all of that ultimate synthesis was chronologically concealed from him.
He planted the seed for the massive oak tree, but he didn't live to sit in its shade.
Therefore, the verse in Micah is not a general broadcast. It is a deeply personal prophetic promise directly from the divine to Moses. As in the days of your exodus from Egypt, referencing the specific pipeline you, Moses, sacrificed everything to open, I will show him, meaning you, Moses wonders. The prophecy guarantees that in the ultimate future, Moses himself will be brought forward to witness the final, perfected, transparent reality that grew from the miraculous process he initiated millennia ago.
He finally gets to see the code he helped write, running flawlessly without crashing the system. I love that resolution for him.
It's very satisfying.
But let me push this out of the theoretical realm. If him specifically and exclusively means the historical figure of Moses, what does this mean for the person listening to us right now?
Good question.
Is this entire text just eavesdropping on a private conversation between God and a biblical prophet? What is the actionable takeaway for a normal person trying to navigate their life?
That is where Hasidic philosophy delivers its most empowering application. A core tenet of this mystical tradition is the belief that every single individual soul contains within it a microscopic but entirely potent spark of Moses. Moses is not viewed solely as an ancient historical actor. He represents an internal psychological archetype of pure divine intellect, truth, and profound connection embedded deeply within the human consciousness.
So we all have a dormant fragment of the ultimate prophet hardware pre-installed in our minds.
We do, but to actually boot up that hardware, to activate that spark, and eventually become the him who is capable of perceiving these future wonders, an individual must employ a rigorous synthesis of both psychological approaches we dissected earlier. Relying on just one is insufficient.
You can't just be the meditating monk, and you can't just be the exhausted office worker. You need the dual action engine.
Precisely. On a granular day-to-day level, an individual must absolutely commit to the grueling, stubborn friction of Kabbalah. You must inhabit the role of the leather tanner.
Right.
You have to identify your coarse, stubborn physical traits, your personal friction points, and relentlessly beat them into shape through disciplined, moral action, especially on the days when you feel absolutely zero spiritual high or inspiration. You have to put in the time to build the shoes.
Because that blind physical action is the only thing capable of drawing down the raw, infinite power into the world. It builds the battery.
Exactly, but if a person stops there, they remain entirely in the dark. They are a battery with no output screen.
So what's the second part?
To prepare your consciousness to actually see the miracles, to have the deeply hidden wonders of reality revealed to your perception, you must also actively awaken that internal Moses spark through intellectual contemplation.
Okay.
You must carve out time to engage in Yehuda Ilah. You have to study, to stretch your mind, to actively meditate on the staggering consistency of nature, to forcefully contemplate the infinite greatness hiding just beneath the surface of the mundane world.
You do the blind, gritty work with your body to generate the immense paradoxical power, and you simultaneously use your intellect to slowly, methodically wipe the mud off the windshield of your mind so you can actually perceive the light you are generating.
The physical work transforms you into an unbreakable vessel. The intellectual contemplation refines your vision to comprehend the marvel of what you contain. When an individual fuses those two actions, the body's obedience and the mind's illumination, they fulfill the ultimate promise of the verse within their own life. They awaken the Moses within, and they become the one to whom the wonders are shown.
I am genuinely awestruck by the sheer scale of the journey we've taken today.
It's a massive text.
We began by deconstructing the literal physics of what constitutes a miracle, realizing that a hacker violently crashing a system with a burning bush is actually demonstrating a lower threshold of power than the subtle, masterful programmer who keeps the planet spinning and the biosphere regenerating without a single glitch for 6,000 years.
The text completely dismantled and rebuilt our hierarchy of reality.
It did. We moved from cosmic physics to human psychology, discovering that the frustrating, unglamorous struggle of trying to do the right thing in a dark, confusing world actually bypasses the ego entirely, hitting a higher, more absolute divine frequency than the most blissful state of enlightened meditation.
Which logically culminated in that incredible reversal. A prophesied future where the physical body, forged by the friction of its struggles, becomes the ultimate spiritual power source for the soul.
If you zoom out and look at the massive architecture this text has built, it utterly annihilates the historical divide between the physical and the spiritual.
Completely.
It takes centuries of religious conditioning that tells us we must escape the material world to find truth, and it throws it out the window. It insists that the mundane, frustrating, deeply physical world is not an obstacle blocking us from the divine. It is the ultimate, final destination. It is the only theater where the infinite can truly be known in its absolute entirety.
It is a theology of extreme, radical immanence. The divine is not floating in a distant heaven. It is hiding right here, in the concrete, in the biology, in the friction, waiting for humanity to perform the labor required to make it visible.
That profound realization leaves us with one final thought. I want you, the listener, to carry this specific image with you as you walk away from this deep dive. The text leaves us with the visceral, exhausting, almost foul-smelling image of a tanner violently working a piece of coarse, dead leather to fashion protective shoes, all so we can safely cross the rushing river of infinite revelation.
Yeah.
I want you to really think about that metaphor. Look at your own life right now. Look closely at the most stubborn, difficult, unspiritual feeling aspects of your daily existence.
We all have them.
Maybe it's a deeply fractured relationship you have to navigate. Maybe it's a humiliating personal habit you can't seem to break. Maybe it's a mind-numbing, tedious job, or just a dark, heavy part of your own psychology, an anger or an insecurity that you constantly battle and deeply resent.
Right.
We are conditioned to view those exact things as massive barriers. We tell ourselves, if only I didn't have this specific struggle, I could be truly spiritual. If I didn't have this anxiety, I could find peace. If I didn't have this difficult person in my life, I could focus on higher things. But what if the profound philosophical physics we unpack today are right? What if those deep frustrations, those humiliating flaws, are not keeping you from experiencing a miracle? What if they are the raw leather you have been specifically assigned? And what if, once you stop trying to escape them, once you stop waiting for a bucket one miracle to magically fix them, and instead put in the grueling, unglamorous, repetitive work to face them, soften them, and align them with a higher purpose, they become the very shoes you desperately need. Without that specific friction, your spiritual container would be too weak. You would be swept away. But with them, with the strength forged by tanning your own inner darkness, you build the exact capacity required to walk directly, safely, and with eyes wide open into the profound wonders promised for the future.
Right.
So stop waiting for the sky to open up. The real miracle is hiding in the exact thing you're trying to avoid. Get to work on your leather.